Hey there, welcome to my first video. Today I'll be showing you how I made the Astera Canteen from Monster Hunter World. The canteen in Astera is easily one of the most iconic aspects of the game. Its primary mechanic is providing buffs to you as your hunter sits down to eat. The buffs you receive become more powerful as you progress through the game, and the size of the kitchen along with it. Naturally, of course, I'll be making the largest version of the kitchen, because that's the one that exists in my game, given that I have 700 hours in it. Should be easy, right? Right. Like most of my projects, this one started with going into our very organised shed to collect my materials. Oh boy. I begin with a simple sketch of the build. This is more of a rough guide than anything else, as a couple of things get moved around as I progress. I then start carving out some of the rock formations out of XPS foam. I don't really measure anything here, I just kinda eyeball it and keep chopping bits off until I get it right. Once I'm happy with the placement, I glue everything down with some PVA glue. I make the table where the Meowscular chef stands in the same way, using some very safe techniques to achieve the desired shape. I initially glued this to the base as well, but I later removed it to make painting a little bit easier. The second layer of foam is more of the same, just cutting and gluing as necessary to fill out the space. I'm not too worried about any large gaps, as I'm going to be covering everything in a very thick layer of modelling paste later. It was now time for detailing on the base. This involved trimming down the foam a little bit, and I added some texture with the help of a very special tool. The rock adds a realistic texture, and is a cheap and nasty way of getting foam to look like rocks without any real effort. I apply a layer of glue, and then a layer of air-dry clay on top of that. This will eventually become the platform that the Meowscular chef stands on. I take the time to smooth out the surface a little bit with some water and my fingers, and apply some clay to some of the larger gaps in the base while I'm at it. Using one of my sculpting tools, I then score some lines into the clay to make it look more like stone. Using my pen, I then proceed to score some lines into the base to make it look more like rock. Some of this does get covered up in the later steps, but it's there, and that's all that matters. I also throw in some smaller bits of foam to act as the coals underneath the massive oven. I mix some modelling paste and water together to create a sort of goop that I can use on the base. This is to hide the texture of the foam, and to help with the priming in the next step. The Meowscular chef's table gets the same treatment too, as that's also made out of stone. The dirt for the bottom of the base was made almost exactly the same way, except I added in some fake modelling dirt to add the texture to it. This was spread on the bottom half of the base, to again hide the texture of the foam underneath. I then covered everything that was once foam in a mixture of Mod Podge and black paint to seal it. This serves as both a primer and a sealant, and gives the paint something to hold on to. I then use spray paint from the top down to get a nice zenithal highlight on the whole model. Time for some sculpting. The chef starts off with a bean for his head, with some pointy cat ears placed on top and then blended in. A small little piece of clay is placed where his face will be and blended in as well. I roll out a little noodle of clay, folded in on itself, and then split it in two to make the little tie for the back of his head. He then gets some little cheek tufts that are blended in as well, and then it's time to move on to the body. His body is a much thicker log with two very large pectoral muscles sculpted in, which are then followed by some tree trunk upper legs. I then make his little lightning bolt tail and his noodle arms, and then I make his back cape thing, and then cross those noodle arms over it. His apron is just a long piece of clay that is wrapped around his body, and once all pieces are done, it's just a case of assembling him. While I had the clay out, I figured I would do the ovens as well. I wanted them all to be hollow, so I ended up sculpting them all over rolled up balls of aluminium foil. I also sculpted a couple of other bits and bobs here, although the majority of the sculpting, including the other two chefs, was done off screen, because it was very frustrating and I hated every moment of it. The other thing I hated was removing the foil once the ovens were done. This larger one here was fine, and was the quickest of all of them, but the entire process for all of the ovens ended up taking well over an hour and a half, and left me with very sore hands afterwards. But I somehow managed to not break any of them, so that's a win. I then went ahead and primed all of the insides of the ovens white to make painting a little bit easier later. I'll be using a lot of reds and yellows, so this will just cut down on how much paint I need to use. And with that, that's it for the sculpting. Here are all the bits I made off camera. I then ventured outside to collect some sticks. I'm lazy and I didn't want to make scale logs, so I just used whatever we had in our backyard. Once sterilised and given time to dry, they're good to go. I ended up making some wooden planks and ladders off camera, as they were also quite frustrating to make. My stain of choice was Agrax Earthshade. Again, I'm really lazy, so I ended up just dipping all of the wood into the pot and just wiping away the excess. All of the wood bits then got a light brown dry brush to help bring out some of the details. The clay bits were primed differently depending on what they were supposed to be. The chefs, for example, were primed with gesso, whereas all of the ovens were primed with the same goop mixture from before. Time for my favourite part of any project, painting. The chef's tables get a shade of grey, the dirt gets a darker shade of brown, and a lighter shade is stippled on top to simulate a well-worn path, and the rocks get a very dark grey. The insides of the ovens get a quick and dirty, fiery paint job. The various meats get dipped in a flesh shade, the woods are painted brown, and any metals are painted black. I base coat the Meowscular chef in an off-white, and his two assistants in brown and white, respectively. The ovens then all receive a brown base coat, while the meats all receive a red base coat. All of the stoneware and the dirt then received a wash in their respective colours. I made sure to water down the washes for the ovens, as I didn't want the colours to become too dark. The dry brushing wasn't anything special, just whatever colours I'd used before. This is where all those little details really start to pop on the model. Time for the details. Not that it will be visible, but I put some black underneath where the oven is going to sit, and gave the coals a fiery coat of paint. Some of the ovens had green stippled on them, as seen in the game, and the primary oven got a couple of red stripes on its cheeks. Then all of the ovens got a black dry brush to imply that the insides had been scorched by fire. The chef's sword received a bright silver edge, and some gold for the paw print details on it. All of the metal components then received a very heavy silver dry brush. The two assistant cats received a simple paint job. Most of my attention was on the Meowscular chef since he's the main event. The chef himself gets some brown paws, a brown muzzle, and some brown stripes on his arms. His apron is a kind of dirty looking grey, with his weird cape thing being a red. His hairnet is that same red colour, and he has one green eye, with a scar over the other. With that, we finally come to the assembly phase. I glue the bananas I made off screen into a bunch, then glue some of the meat into the mouth of the primary oven. I then glue the sword onto the Meowscular chef's back. I glue some tools into the hands of the other cats, and please enjoy this assembly montage. All the model needs now is some greenery. I start by trimming these little frond things I found at a local dollar store to size. I then hot glue them next to the primary oven. Despite it likely being a fire hazard, I then glue some of them on top of the primary oven. I then give it a quick trim because it was far too unruly. Next are the two support beams. They get hot glued in place, and then yarn is strung up between them. I string the last of the little bits onto some of the yarn, and then proceed to place the netting that runs over the canteen. Once trimmed to size, I then hot glue some more fronds on top of it, and then in a few other spots around the model, and that's it. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to making more in the future. Until then, have a good one.